So what is the current argument that you have going on in your life with you? You know, the world has become so polarized over the last couple of years, the last few years, that arguments just seem to abound. I would even say that I truly believe there are people in the world who want to argue just to argue.
I don't agree with that.
And that's my point. And then there's the biggest fight that we've all had in our household, the biggest fight of all times. And that's which way does the toilet paper go? Some moms would even say, I'm just excited somebody put some on there. But to help out, here's how I remember. And if you disagree with me, that's fine, but this is how I remember how to do it. Mullets are bad, beards are cool.
That's right.
In life, our favorite stories, our favorite movies, whatever it is we watch for entertainment, they revolve around some sort of conflict. Whether it's good against evil or somebody trying to get something from someone else. And sometimes whether it's petty or it's a serious conflict, that's the aspect of the entertainment that draws us in. In sitcoms, they'll put laugh tracks with the conflict of petty arguments to kind of remind you that this is kind of silly or kind of petty. But when we talk about real life, our conflicts are never funny. Could you imagine in the middle of a conflict with peers at work? Or a family that's being ripped apart by divorce? Perhaps the silent treatment between you and your partner is starting to sound like a violent scream. It's just awkward. Real conflict in real life's not funny. They don't go together. And unresolved conflict, that's a great tension in our lives. And when we have unresolved conflicts, we have other angst and grief in our lives. So today we'll talk about conflict in our relationships and how we can use our conflict to grow closer to God and to each other. So this is the fifth week now that we've been discussing relationships. And so here's our quick recap. We want to clarify expectations. Remember that in week 1. We realize that we have expectations that we put on others. Sometimes we have expectations that we're not aware of. And we need to make sure that what expectations, when we realize them and when we understand them, that we make them clear and known up front. And the second was listen. We need to listen to what people are telling us and saying. 3, to be self-aware. If you remember the image of the iceberg, the 10% that we see versus the 90% of us that's hidden and what's really going on below the surface. Number 3, to be self-aware, to know what's going on with us under that surface and what it is in our past and in our childhood or our families or in life that has shaped us and made us the way that we are. And the last time we met, we talked about knowing your true self, who it is that God made you to be. Remember, God made us on purpose, with a purpose. Now, Jesus expects this of all of us. He expects all of his followers to love others well. Matthew records it, and we've talked about this so many times. He records this fight where the religious leaders come up and they try to pick this fight with Jesus. And they said, "Hey, Rabbi, what's the greatest commandment in the law?" And Jesus responds with, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it." Catch that? And the second is just like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the prophets hang on these 2 commandments. All of the law and the prophets hang on these 2 commandments. So to sum this up, love God, love others. It's so simple, even a caveman could do it, right? But it's really not that simple for us. So that's why it's good that we talk about how to love each other well. As a kid, we always sang this song. They will, and the verses went, one of the lines went, "They will know we are Christians by our love, not by our speech, not by our political affiliations, not by our secret handshake or what church we go to. No, Jesus sums it all up in this statement: love God, love others. And it's so embedded in my brain now when I read this text that I'll hear that childhood song. They will know we are Christians by our love. And there's nothing else to it. That's it. We are to love God and love others. Bob Goff, he words it this way in his writings: love is not something we fall into. Love is something that we become. So we've been learning about what tools that will help us become love, and today's tool is how to fight cleanly. See, conflict's gonna happen. If we have a healthy relationship, there's gonna be conflict. And so we need to learn how to fight in a way that we'll call fighting clean, so that we use the conflict to help us grow closer to God and grow closer to others. And maybe think about, how did you and your family handle conflict as you were growing up? Maybe you were one of those people where families were real quiet, and maybe, I grew up in the 80s. I don't know too many guys that journaled. Maybe they did. But maybe when you got mad, you ran and you just hid in your room and you journaled down whatever it was and your feelings, and you just kind of pressed them down. Or perhaps you had a family of these loud, spirited conversations and disagreements where it was all open and it was all out there, and then it was over with. And the next day, you guys were sitting around the table playing Scrabble together, having a good time. When Michelle and I first went to Thanksgiving dinner at her grandmother's house, they were very loud, and I wasn't used to that. I was told, no talking at the table, no singing at the table. I did all these things at the table, and my father would tell me to stop. And now I'm sitting at this where they're like disagreeing and arguing loudly with each other. And I didn't know what to do or how to act. And then later, they're hugging and loving and opening Christmas gifts or Thanksgiving, playing football or whatever. And it was so different. And looking back, I see it might have been okay. It might have really been okay, but I was one that usually would hide from conflict or disagreement. Or I would inappropriately laugh, like the laugh track earlier. And I remember friends, they were fighting. I was pretty young, and I had this friend that was a little older than me, and him and his wife were arguing, and I would just start laughing and making jokes, and they'd go, "This is the wrong time." I'm like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I was like Will Ferrell in the racing movie. I don't know what to do with my hands. This is what I was doing in arguments. I don't know what to do. But open conflict can be healthy. I always thought disagreement and conflict meant something was wrong. But I've learned that conflict can mean that something is very right, because conflict's normal. See, when we express our disagreements in conversation in clean, healthy ways, we grow in our authenticity and our emotional intimacy. Addressing conflict is necessary, and it's important if relationships are to grow and mature. So the truth that conflict, it's inevitable. Everybody has, whether they admit it or not, whether they express it, has had some conflict. And even if we're not internally aware, it's happening. So it's how we respond with our conflict that either grows or kills a relationship. It's our response that is going to force our relationship to grow or to die. And since it's truly inevitable, how do we respond to it? What are our options? One option when it comes to conflict is we choose false peace. This is the point when you just want everyone to be happy. Everyone just needs to smile. Everyone needs to be okay. Let's just keep the status quo. What will make me feel the most comfortable? Some of us probably unconsciously create false peace, and we think we're doing the right thing. I always think of we used to watch that 70s show. And Red, I kind of liked Red because you never were confused about what Red was thinking, the father. You knew exactly what Red was thinking. And his son Eric and his friends were always into hijinks and getting in, their silly pranks and whatever. And when Dad would confront Eric about his stupidity and it would get kind of loud and heated, Mom would laugh and giggle and, okay guys, and that's a false peace. You're trying to cover it up. Ultimately, the problem with false peace is that we put off our difficult issues and problems in an effort to keep everything stable. But because we're not honest with ourselves or with others, we end up feeling distant. And that's an inauthentic way that leaves us in an emotional isolation. No one really, it's where we go, no one really truly knows me, no one gets me, no one really sees me. So we feel alone and lonely, and there's no real peace in those kind of emotions. Jeremiah words it this way. He says that they dress the wounds of my people as though it were not serious. Another version says, they treat this superficially. Peace, peace, they say, when there is no peace. See, true peace will never come pretending that something is okay when it's not okay. In Matthew 5:19, a famous verse says, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God. And this usually gets confused, but Jesus does not invite us to be peacekeepers, doing everything we can to not rock the boat. Jesus says, blessed are the peacemakers. And that's something different. That is taking on conflict directly and doing it in a loving and a caring way. Jesus modeled this all the time to everyone, everywhere he went. He modeled it to those he was intentionally discipling, such as Peter. And remember, Peter was one of Jesus' closest followers. So they're all gathered, the disciples and Jesus, and he's telling them how he's going to die. And he says, 3 days later, I'm going to rise from the dead. And Peter, he hears Jesus say, I'm going to die. And Peter flips out. Peter freaks out. He loses it. He cannot handle this information that Jesus, who he loves so much, is not going to be with him anymore. And Peter pulls Jesus aside and he rebukes him. And he says, this will never happen, Lord. Never, never, never. And Jesus turns to Peter and he says, get behind me, Satan. You're a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns. I suppose Jesus could have responded with, hey, Peter, I'm so sorry that this news has upset you. I'll tell you what, I'm going to go talk to God. I'm going to go talk to Daddy God. And we'll come up with another plan, one that makes you feel warm and cuddly and better. I don't want you to be mad, hurt, or upset. But Jesus didn't do that. Jesus got right to the heart of what was going on, and he addressed it directly. He addressed it immediately, and he didn't let the conflict with Peter derail the mission that Jesus was on. He handled the conflict in order to move forward with peace by clarifying to Peter what exactly was going to happen. Peter Casero, the author of the book Emotionally Healthy Relationships, says this: true peacemakers love God and themselves enough to disrupt false peace. You cannot have true peace with lies and false pretense. Lies must be exposed to the light and replaced with the truth. This is the mature, loving thing to do. So what are our options for handling conflict? There's the false peace, which does not create peace at all. And it does nothing to resolve anything at all. I guess our other option is we could choose to fight dirty. My partner years ago would say, well, if you ain't cheating, you ain't trying. And it was a funny statement, and I would laugh as we'd use that in regards to fighting, but it's not a good way to fight, especially when we're talking about resolving conflict with people we want to love, and we want to love others better. Of course, you know that that person over there, you know that guy, I know he fights dirty, but not me. Or, I know that guy does it that way, but I don't do that. Of course not, because, you know, I'm proper and innocent in my fighting. And we know that's not true. We've all had a moment in our lives where we've used one of these following techniques I'm going to share with you. And when you see them, I want you to consider, look inside and think about what is it have I done to fight dirty in my relationships? And here's that list. And I did include them in your notes because I want you to keep them so later you might want to look back at these and think, oh, is this what I'm doing to that person? But we have denial, sarcasm, the silent treatment, walking away, shouting, using words like always or never, being passive aggressive. So now, pick out your dirty fighting technique, because we all have at least one, maybe two or three, hopefully not the whole list. But number one, the denial. What are you talking about? I'm not an angry person. I don't know what you're talking about. Perhaps it's sarcasm. Okay, fine, since you know everything about everything, why don't you tell me how it's going to go? Or the silent treatment. I have nothing to say about that. What about walking away? It's one I used to do a lot of. Shouting. Maybe that's what you just do. You just shout over the other person. Or the terms, you know, you always do that, or you never do that. And then there's the passive aggressive, which really means avoiding direct communication about a conflict, acting like things are fine, only to pout, or to manipulate, or to do something else to act out your feelings because you don't want to talk about them. So if we're honest, and let's be honest, which of these fight techniques is your go-to? When you're backed into a corner and you feel like you have to defend yourself, identify at least one of them. Because if we can identify them, we can work on them. As I was working through this, I started thinking about it myself, and I told Michelle in the car ride today to the hardware store, I said, you know, tonight's going to be pretty good. It's really caused me to think a lot about our past conflicts and arguments or disagreements, and maybe things I've said that I probably shouldn't have said, or ways I acted that I shouldn't have acted to you. I said, or maybe the way you've done or said things to me in the past that maybe we can work on. So I don't want you to think I'm throwing this out there. I want you to know I'm working on this too. But if we can identify them, we can work on them. So, you know, maybe keep your notes, maybe snap it on, onto your phone so that you can refer to it later when you're in a situation of conflict and you're wondering, what on earth am I doing here? Because once we can identify what we're doing, we can ask Jesus to help us out of it and to help us not do that. We have to stop it, and we have to stop it because we're hurting ourselves and we're hurting the people we love the most. And if you're afraid of conflict and you want to push it down, you want to ignore it, you can only sweep so much of this stuff under the rug before you finally just start tripping over it. How many times have you pushed something down or swept it under the rug, and then a loved one says the simplest thing to you, and you just explode? And the thing you're now arguing about likely had nothing to do with what you probably are arguing about. It's maybe all those months or years, days, hours of things you probably should have dealt with that you've buried and swept under the rug, and now it's a tripping hazard. So let's review. We can use false peace, we can fight dirty, or we can fight cleanly. And we're going to fight cleanly because this is the way. A clean fight is a negotiation between two people for the sake of their relationship. This is most likely what Paul meant when he penned the words to us, "Do not repay anyone evil for evil," because that's dirty fighting. "Be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everyone." So there he gives us a note of something we need to be doing. "If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone." In other words, have a good, clean fight. And it's good, if you read back through that Paul says, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. But sometimes it's not possible. Sometimes we can do everything that we can do. We can go through all the steps of trying to do it right, not fighting dirty, not making false peace. But the other person, they're not ready for this. And they're fighting dirty. And they're just not ready. So in this case, we have to just make peace with ourselves. Have to make peace with God. And that's okay. So here's what it looks like to fight clean. Well, let's say I've instigated this fight. Let's say I'm an initiator of this fight. That sounds better. But I'm usually an instigator. It's likely I did. It's how it goes. But here's what I need to do. The clean fight initiator. I need to pray. I need to ask God for wisdom. And I need to ask God to help me check my motives. Because there's only one motive for a clean fight, and that's for the relationship. And not to be right. If the motivation is for me to be right, or for me to win something, then that motive cannot be correct. I need to ask. I need to ask the person for permission to have this clean fight. And it could sound something like, "Hey, is this an all right time for me to share something kind of difficult with you? Can I tell you about something that's kind of hard to share, but I care about you and I just want to discuss this?" Maybe it looks like that. And with their permission, share. But share with respect of the other person. Share with them what you're feeling and what conflict you're dealing with out of respect. And then finally, make a request, and make a request of what you're hoping for. From this point, I hope this would happen, or we can do this. Example, if I'm the initiator, would now be an okay time to share with you something of concern? I noticed lately that when we come together and we have a meeting, you bring up all these things that are going wrong and not well. And you're a team leader. You're highly thought of. And I don't want to see the team become negative because they look up to you. And you set the tone sometimes because you are so well respected. So perhaps next time we meet, you could share at least 2 positive things, 2 things that are going well. Maybe in the workplace, that's how you could carry out a conversation like that. So I asked permission, I shared with respect to that person, and I made a reasonable request. Now, what if I'm the clean fight receiver? Well, first I gotta avoid dirty fighting. It is not okay for me to say, "Oh, okay, since you're the expert, you tell me what to do." Or, Can't do it. Just no dirty fighting. We're not going to have it. Next, just listen. We spent one whole evening talking about listening because listening is so important. But listen and really try to understand what the other person is trying to express to you and how they are feeling. And the third one, we've probably all heard at some point in our professional lives or in these type of settings, reflect. Reflect back to that speaker what it is you think they're telling you. For example, Kim, what I think you're telling me is that your kids drive you nuts some days, and you could stand a break from them for just a little bit. Is that what I'm understanding? I say that in jest, but if you're having a conversation, it's kind of, you would reflect back what you believe they're saying to you. And that also, if they say, Kim says, no, Ryan, you're wrong. My kids are beautiful angels, and I treasure every second of every waking moment with them. And then I know that I need to correct my listening skills. And last, we negotiate. I just finished another negotiating training scenario this week, and we don't negotiate that way with our friends and family. But this type of negotiating, we find something that we can agree on. So in the story I made up, in the scenario I made up, the receiver says, well, the negative things I bring up are things we really need to work on. I guess I could be more positive next time. And then the initiator might respond with, I get that. And we do want to be our best. Perhaps next time, if you share a positive thing for every negative thing, maybe if you could share 2 positives per negative, maybe we can come to agreement on how this is going to look going forward. And that's kind of what a clean fight would look like. Most of us, however, are so entrenched in our dirty fighting, this is going to take a lot of practice. And even today, I heard myself saying things to Michelle, and I would shut my mouth and I'd say, I want to apologize. You're going to get this later today, but I was just dirty fighting. Let me step back and do this again. And I think that's okay. We naturally, we want to pull back. And we want to, if we get trapped in that corner, we want to fight to conquer. We want to fight to win. We want to put up our fists and we want to be ready to dirty fight. But when it comes to clean fighting, when it comes to relationships that matter, we're laying down our right to defend ourselves and we're working for a better relationship. And most of us are going to need help. I know I do. I keep thinking, this information is so good. How can, I told you earlier, I want to develop it to share with others, and even at work and in secular settings and other Christians. How do we get this message out that we can fight clean and we can fight to save and better our relationships? Because at the end of the day, I want marriages to survive. I want parents and children to be able to communicate. I want adult children and their parents to be able to work through the struggles and the issues. I want brothers and sisters to be friends again. I want best friends from high school. And at the end of the day, I want us all to learn how to love God and love others better. And there's some ways we can do that. One is we can get the book that this has been based out of, and that's Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. It's a great book to start with. This is something we can do. I've been talking with Michelle about how we could maybe revisit this in a few months and do this as a side course, get the leader's book and group books, and we can go through this and invite others and other maybe family, friends, and members to join us in a little more in-depth study on how we can learn to be the person God's made us and to love God and to love others better. Having a counselor, making time for that, setting aside finances even so that you could have a third party to help you learn to communicate in better ways. These are all great ways. Now, who's that one person that I asked you about when we started this journey, that you would like to see that relationship improved. Because here's this week's challenge. Every week we've ended with a challenge. And talk to that person and tell them what you learned this week. Tell them about these week's conversations. Tell them about the techniques and what clean fighting looks like. And there's a good chance you might have to apologize for fighting dirty. You could even forward them the YouTube link to tonight and say, would you watch this? Tell me what you think. Maybe we can talk it through. And maybe talk about these techniques that we can use on each other so that we can do better and be better. And this is not at all easy. I even told you, as I've been talking about it with my wife and working it out, I have to sometimes stop myself, realize what I'm doing, think about that list of dirty fighting techniques and step back and go, okay, don't do that anymore. It's honestly the work of our lives. And it's going to take a lifetime for us to grow and do better at loving God and loving others well. So let's close tonight by looking at it, why it is so hard to love others well, why it takes so much work, and why we need the power of the Holy Spirit inside of us to help us love well. Paul writes, finally, be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. See, the evil one, he has schemes. And he has schemes to break apart our relationships with God and others. And while we work for unity, the evil one works to divide us. It's his one and only play. And when he wins, that means our relationships with God and others are broken. Paul goes on and says, for our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. There's only one enemy, and it's not each other. So be strong. Have courage as you learn to live authentic and healthy relationships. This is the fight of our lives. And with God's power, we will win this fight. And we will be able to show love to a watching world. I'll leave you with this. We do not fight to win the argument. We fight